Today, we're joined with Matthew, an entrepreneur and technology builder in the real estate space. Matthew has founded and scaled companies focused on real estate syndication platforms and now leads innovation around real estate data infrastructure, leveraging AI, blockchain, and workflow automation to bring transparency, trust, and efficiency to property management and capital markets. His work sits at the intersection of real estate, technology, and data, helping teams better organize, verify, and actually use their information to make smarter decisions. Welcome, Matthew.
Joe, thank you so much for having me. Right now, we're a little both under the weather, but we're gonna have a spectacular conversation. I already know. That's our mentality. That's the hustle mentality. Even when the cards are not in our favor, we get after it. And here we are recording a podcast.
That's right, and I'm just excited to learn more about your story. So let's dive into it. Why don't you tell me about kind of where you started? I know we talked about that before, that you didn't start in the real estate market. You started in day trading and then moved into real estate in a particularly unique way. So start with that and then how that kind of fits into the bigger picture of your company today.
Certainly. So 6 years ago is when I had gotten into real estate. So preceding that, I spent about a year or two looking at capital markets and day trading and trying to figure out how money moved into different asset classes. I was most interested in how I could leverage that or do some hedging or arbitrage and make money off of how capital was flowing into these different assets. And so I was looking at derivatives, so like futures contracts, options contracts, and different like VIX and oil and S&P and all of these different things and figuring out how they move together, how I could study that, how I could find pockets of liquidity where institutions were sitting, doing my fundamental and technical analysis, crunching the numbers, and then executing trades. Did that for a while, and I did that with a few other people. We had a group where we would look at all the numbers, we would create buy and sell signals, we'd hop in and out. We built up a community around this. I learned that you can do the math, you can have all the metrics in front of you, but it's really psychological. And I was young, I was ambitious, and so I was definitely pushing my capital to the limits and ended up taking some losses while day trading. I need something else to look at. I really liked finance, I liked technology, and someone came to me and said, I've been investing, or he had been investing in real estate for a while. Why don't I look at that market and figure out if there was an edge that I could find? And while we were talking about everything going on in real estate, he was explaining how the minimum check size to get into these deals was $100,000, like a real estate project, and he didn't want to invest $100,000 at a time. It would be nicer if he could do 25,000 or even 5,000 and start to diversify it across multiple real estate developers, multiple portfolios and projects. Because the reality is, and we were living in Milwaukee, which has seen some growing pains, not every real estate project is successful. And so you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. I said, very interesting idea. Let's figure out if we could actually bring down the barrier to entry. First, we have to identify why it costs $100,000 to get into a real estate deal or more, and then what solution can be presented in order to fix that. What we landed on is that what we'd call back office work, so a lot of paperwork, putting together the investor lists and the paperwork and the subscription agreements and the cap table, taking care of all those folks that just invested in their distributions was a lot of work. And so you really want to work with serious investors. So if we could automate some of that using different technologies, then maybe real estate developers would be more open to having smaller investors in these deals. That's exactly what we did. We built a marketplace around that. So it was a digital platform plus a marketplace. The digital platform was the investor portal. The marketplace was where you would actually look at deals and then invest into those. We had a fantastic pipeline, but we ran into some issues. Running a marketplace is very difficult. One, because on top of building a startup, which is already expensive and complex, you now have to source thousands of investors, which is costly. And then you have to essentially nurture them into investing into these real estate deals and taking care of them on behalf of all these real estate developers and sponsors. So that's an issue. And on top of that, was this struggle to find product market fit because we were not solving enough of a pain point that real estate developers or investors were going to be paying us a decent amount for access to the platform. And I started to notice not only are they not paying us enough, but they're never showing up prepared. And so this is creating a lot of work for us. And it was actually in that lack of preparedness that I had an epiphany. It took years to figure this out, but I was looking at where real estate markets and the real estate industry was going, and I was noticing this massive trend of digital transformation, this drive to accumulate and act on data and to become data driven by consequence, and digital markets where people are transacting or they're trying to make collateralization decisions or investment decisions, they're asking more of the underlying assets. And so after all that time, I took a step back and I said, I think I really know where the market, where the industry at large is going. I'm going to pivot. My co-founder and I, we went our separate ways. I started my current company now, and we did a bunch of research, market research, customer research. I'm also well into tokenization, which some folks know what that is. A lot of folks, it is a big fancy word that maybe they read online or with crypto or with Larry Fink. There's all these weird connotations associated with it, but it was this idea that capital was going to be flowing into projects differently. And I saw that as a gold rush. So in a gold rush, you sell picks. And that was exactly what our company was doing. If people are going to be investing in new ways, if they're going to be looking for projects, if they're going to try to do fancy new things with their capital stack, the equity, the debt, or operations, what are they really going to be relying on? It's going to be their data. Everyone is going to need to undergo this transition of digitizing all their documents, their systems, even their people, and then figuring out how to capture that, how to architect that, and orchestrate that, and create these digital portfolios. So I positioned us right in that inflection point or that turning point between physical industry and market, because real estate is truly the most physical out of any investment class, and the online era that we are entering into.
That's very interesting. So when you talk about that, then what does a typical day look like for you? Like, how are you balancing production, development, research, and marketing education?
Well, there's a lot going on. Where do I even start? We're in the midst of a fundraise, or we're kicking it off. And so a lot of my day is consumed by investor conversations, investor outreach, and also rubbing elbows with people who probably know investors so that at some point they can make introductions for me. It's always good to know people and to build that rapport for them to trust the product, the company, myself, and then hopefully be in a position where they will deploy capital into our vision so that we can continue development of a product or roll out a new phase of the product, onboard new customers, enter a new region, whatever that might be. So that's a lot of my day. And well, that can actually take many different forms. Some of that is posting on LinkedIn so that people are familiar with our cause and they see my face. Some of it is webinars or podcasts, in-person events, actually filling out forms on websites and saying, this is the problem we're solving. Here's our solution. Here's the market size, that type of stuff. On top of that, because the capital is going somewhere, it's going towards product. I have been leading the product vision for the second quarter of 2026 and putting together not only what this should look like, what it should feel like, but how it maintains compliance. We are definitely barking up a big tree, and that means handling institutional portfolios and international clients. You can't spare expenses when you are working with this caliber of real estate developers or asset managers. And so I'm very careful about how all this is being put together. What other hats do I wear? Well, there's the typical marketing and education where I'm raising awareness about property technology, financial technology, major industry trends, and helping people digest that, become comfortable with the new age of business. A lot of it is AI, some of it is blockchain as well. Day-to-day operations, legal paperwork, partnership, sales, a little bit of everything, but it's all about pushing us forward, trying to get more revenue, trying to get more funding, and give us the capital and the human capital that we need in order to have a substantial impact on the industry.
Very interesting. What are the major shifts that you're seeing right now in real estate when it comes to data and AI and transparency?
Whew, that's a big question. And how do I stop myself from rambling? Let's see. So, first and foremost, it's been long said that data is the new oil, but people don't entirely know what they mean when they say that or what it means when they hear that. It's a valuable resource, yes, but it needs to be processed. When we first started fracking and you're drilling and you have crude oil, the value is not necessarily in the oil itself as this raw resource from the earth. It's what you can do with it. And this is what made the robber barons so successful that they found a dozen different uses for it and were constantly repurposing it and even taking the waste product and finding new ways to turn that into a product that consumers would buy. And I think that's the really big opportunity with data as the new oil. The fact that you can process it, which might mean structuring it. So you have unstructured data. Imagine a PDF or a photograph or some blueprints that have been drawn up. That's unstructured, in that a computer could not make sense of that, and most people cannot immediately make sense of that. We like lines and columns. So if I'm looking for, imagine we have a spreadsheet in front of us, and I want to know some critical information. I want to know name, birth date, and age, which can be deducted by birth date, but I want to know those three things. So then we would probably put in under name Matthew, so I can immediately identify name Matthew, and then go to my birth date, put my age. That's structured data. But the unstructured format might be my birth certificate, where it does not literally say all that information. Actually, it does, so that's not the perfect example. But a birthday cake with the years on it would be something that's unstructured. There's actually data within that. Like if I took a picture of a birthday cake. Okay, so now what if I took a picture of a job site? This is going to be a much better example that I wish that I started with. So if I took a picture of a job site, let's say it's a construction site and some work is being done on there. I take a picture of it. There's some beams going up. There's some guys standing around. There's some tools. Looks like things are kind of progressing. That's unstructured data. But what you could do is what you can structure out of that, if you were to compare to what was done yesterday, is it's 45% done yesterday and 50% done today. Now you took unstructured data and you looked at, well, there's additional beams that are in place. There's work that's been performed. There's all this documentation that coincides with that. And so we now have actual actionable data on top of that. We can see that this is 5% more complete. That tells us a lot more than the standalone image or just perceiving what our perception of the project as it's getting done. Structured data is actionable. It's something that can be put in lines and columns. It can be interpreted by people fairly neutrally and certainly by a computer. So you need to process your data. You need to structure it. It needs to be organized. So now that you have all this information about a real estate project, or you could abstract this to healthcare or agriculture, whatever, you want to be organized with that, because if you have a surplus of data and you're not able to pick out the important stuff, then you are actually slowing yourself down. So you need to be organized. Another keyword that I use is indexable, which means if I type in lease report or bill of quantities or expenses Q2 2026, can I actually find the corresponding document? If none of your files are named appropriately, if there's no metadata, if there's no tags or context, I'm not going to be able to find anything that I need. And now I have 10,000 different documents and no way to really sift through them. So we need things to be indexable. We also need things to be trustworthy. Just because I have a document and give it to you does not mean that the document is correct or that I can be trusted. I might give off that perception that if I say, here's all of our information, that I'm being transparent, and you would love to assume that, but it's not inherent in the deal. And the more counterparties there are involved as you perform something, whether that's a transaction or a workflow or conducting business in general, the more counterparties, the more that we have to bet on each other. And there becomes this inherent risk. And there's also just unknown frictions that maybe when I moved the document from myself to you, you sent it to someone else, you made some changes, you thought they were appropriate changes. That's okay, that's good. But the end user did not know that. They did not know that something changed from the original document. And so this can completely change context. It can change our understanding of a deal. So we need trust embedded in our data as well. And then you need to now that you have good, trusted, organized, machine readable data, where are you actually going to use it? And this is where you start turning it into an insight or an analytic, or using it within a calculation of sorts, which maybe drives evaluation. So there's this process, as you can see, and this is why I call it processing the data, where you come to trust it, you make it usable, and then you push it to where it becomes resourceful to you. Data points for the sake of collecting data points is not necessarily useful to you, but if it helps drive a decision, if it shows transparency, if it becomes a dollar sign on a bottom line that is realized and then goes into your pocket, that is massively beneficial.
Very cool, very cool. Now, how has the growing need for verified and trusted data, especially across portfolios and stakeholders, impacted your approach to building your platform?
Yeah, that's a really good question because we decided to focus on trust more than just the data itself. Data is portable, trust is not. So I can move documents from me to you, but does my confidence in that document, is that relayed in you? Do you trust those numbers as much as I do? Do you understand where they came from? And then if those were taken out of context, which often happens when you're processing documents, because if I have a big legal agreement, this is another example, and maybe a better example. A legal contract is technically unstructured data. There's going to be a date in there, there's going to be some counterparties, there's going to be if, buts, and ands. But overall, it's like 50 pages of just legal jargon. That's unstructured. The structured version of that is lines and columns. Here's the two parties involved. Here's the date. Here's the dollar sign. Like, let's say it's an investment. And so if we structure that, now we just see the people, the date, the dollar signs, and that's in a system. So somewhere, let's say it's on the cap table, well, we're missing context. And so people can become confused. It creates opacity again. And so we said, when all of this data is moving between systems, between stakeholders, they're making decisions off of that. Somehow the original trust, the original confidence in those numbers and those documents needs to be carried over. And even if it's not inherited immediately, such as if another party doesn't just trust it 100% for the sake of it, if they could at least audit it or inspect it to the point that they become trusting of it, and then that enables things to move faster. And so that's the approach that we took. And we have our ways of accomplishing that between metadata and provenance and digital fingerprints so that as documents and data move between systems, between people, or across time, that we can inspect them, that we can trust them, we can understand who, what, where, how, when, why. We could look at how those documents or that data has evolved over time, or if it hasn't. We can understand the people involved and their credentials. We can also see if those people with credentials signed off on it at a given time. And all of that is embedded into this digital package of documents or data or just within the system itself. And we found that this is really the missing piece because in a data-rich world, there's too much noise, and you have to be able to differentiate what's good versus what's bad, what's important, what's conflated, all these different attributes. And especially in private markets. So a lot of real estate sits in private markets, and private markets are the opposite of public markets, where like your stock portfolio is Apple, Google, Tesla. They go through the federal government and FINRA. There's an Edgar database. There's authorities and auditors, right? Lots of scrutiny. Real estate, on the other hand,
Right.
is in a private market. And so it's the opposite of that. It has no scrutiny. It has very minimal reporting standards or standardization, very little disclosure, low expectations. And so when you're sitting in a market like that, which is full of risk, fraud, manipulation, opacity, being able to make a decision by identifying not just the data, but the trust within that data where there is no one looking out for you is extremely important. That's the big difference. In public markets, someone's looking out for you. If Apple, multi-trillion dollar market cap, started fudging numbers, we'd find out. They get audited, people comb over everything. When the real estate developer down the street fudges numbers, no one's looking out for you. I mean, you can try opening a lawsuit. They probably have more money than you. You don't even know where to start. You don't even know how to audit the documents or do your diligence correctly to figure out that the numbers weren't correct. You just lose money. That's what happens. You get screwed on the deal. So we said, oh, this is no way to function, especially not as markets become more demanding or people are trying to invest more or transact more. There has to be some way that we can have access to the data, that we can trust the data, that we don't impede on people's privacy or their controls or their intellectual property. And without getting into all the technology, that is exactly what we did.
Okay. So what's working well for you right now in terms of growth, adoption, and awareness?
Well, people are fascinated by this concept, and I know that it's a lot to swallow and that my structured versus unstructured data examples were weak. But generally speaking, people are like, "Wow, this is fascinating," and I get it. They also recognize that this is a transformational time for industries, for markets. Things are digitizing, and this comes with its own concerns. And I'll give one. Not related to anything that we do, people are very familiar with deep fakes. They know that they might be looking at a photograph with someone in there who isn't actually there, or it isn't their face, or they didn't do that, or there's all these new AI videos. And so in an online era, you have this increased risk of compromise, of fraud, manipulation, of abuse, all these different elements. And people are worried about that. They're saying, well, how do I trust what's online? Bingo. If you can abstract that to our industry where people are making multi-million or even billion-dollar financial decisions off of, a supposed deal that's in front of them because they want to develop a neighborhood or they want to invest overseas, whatever, then you see why this warrants a better way to display data and to trust that data and make decisions off of it. And markets, they move quickly. There's a penalty for not moving. We call that opportunity costs. And then there's also associated diligence costs. So you can't just spend your whole life looking at one deal and making sure that everything is perfect. You have to invest. You have to deploy your capital. And so that means moving fast, but how do you move fast without compromising the integrity of the deal, of the investment in general, or incurring excess risk? And so there's this big demand for a solution like ours that is able to process that data or help property owners, real estate developers, asset managers process that data, get it ready, make it presentable, also make the trust in those documents and data portable so that other people can inherently trust it as if it's been reviewed by a giant intermediary or authority like the federal government. And we have our own ways of doing that, digital fingerprints and attestation, different credentials that are embedded, and KYC or KYB, so know your customer, know your business, all these different things, all these different protections that we offer so that people can operate more smoothly and with greater confidence in one another. And then as a foundation, this helps markets move faster. Capital can be deployed, capital goes into projects. When projects have the funding they need, well, in our case, it's real estate. So you can imagine real estate literally goes up. Real estate constitutes our cities and our skylines. So you're seeing the world around us being built and hopefully more successfully. And this isn't just for investment purposes. Data can be useful for management or operations or day-to-day stuff. And so the whole thing works out smoother because of the presence of data. So whatever example I give, it resonates with people. They appreciate that. They say, yes, in an online world, we want data, we want trust, we want to see things be successful, we want stakeholders to be able to trust each other. It totally makes sense. And I would say that the best example of how this is all working out is that I'm invited to speak all over the world on this very topic where people say, hey, I think you're onto something. Why don't you explain this to a real estate audience or a tech audience? Just help us unpack what the trend is, what we can capitalize off of it, and why it's important. Why should people listen? So that's been the pat on the back, the confidence that we've been working on something that is important to people, and probably if folks from all different cultures, languages, and countries want us to talk about it, that it seems to be like a universal principle.
That's very interesting. And Great story about how you're spreading that knowledge across. Where do you see, or where have you seen the most friction, whether it be in the product market fit or education or getting people to actually change how they operate?
Well, a lot of it is education. I'd start there. And I'm really kicking myself in the butt for my unstructured versus structured data example. But the best way to get people to learn is have clear examples. So if you don't take it from me, just Google unstructured versus unstructured data. But we need to be having these conversations. We need people to want to tune in and understand what's happening, why it's important. There's also some folks who spread misinformation in the industry, and new technologies are definitely prone to this. AI, blockchain, and then blockchain gets associated with crypto, and then people say, well, if you're using blockchain, that sounds like crypto, even though it's apples to oranges, and therefore it's a scam. And it's like, no, 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 no. I use blockchain in the way that the institutions or the governments is using it, which is for credibility and auditability and transparency. So we need to have conversations around that. We also need to recognize when technology has failed people. This is definitely happening, and it's starting to happen with AI, where people plug in tools and then there's a leak or there's a bad output, or a lot of things at stake. So we need to acknowledge when things go wrong and say, hey, this is an expensive, teachable moment. How do we move on from this? How do we do things correctly going forward? Some things are technology or platform, but so much of it is also people and process. And shout out to Rick Kahn. I use his 5 pillars all the time, and he deserves credit for this. But he always says, start with purpose. Why do we need to do this? Why are we trying to accomplish change? And then moving into people. Who are the people who are going to carry that out? What do they need to know? What skills do they need to have? How do we make them care? And then process. Now that they know that they have to do something, what are they actually doing? And oftentimes, especially in real estate, to accomplish what we want, it doesn't start with the technology or platform itself. In many cases, it starts with the work being done on the property, which is very tangible. It's on the job sites. Maybe we want to record that maintenance was performed, but you still need a skilled laborer who goes in and performs the maintenance on whatever, whether it's the mechanical or something electrical or plumbing. So those people have to do the jobs, and then they have to record, document all the information pertaining to that, such as the components and the materials that they used and the serial numbers, the manufacturers associated with that, and the operating manual report or log the date of the work that it was done, put it in the right place, and all that stuff. And then finally, you can measure performance. So looking back across everything, have we done our job well? Are we getting better at doing this? Where's the friction or the bottlenecks, and how do we start to resolve those? So I think that's the right approach in this industry, getting people to care, then understanding that there are people involved in all of these responsibilities, not just throwing technology at them or threatening to automate them away, which you can't do in real estate. Sometimes you get away with that in other industries. You say, do this right, or we're going to find AI to do it. You don't get that excuse in construction. You can't just like bully people into that. You got to make them
Right.
care, show the accountability, show the process.
Gotcha. So which matrices are you most focused on improving right now?
Well, it's a pretty open-ended question. Should we focus on like one part of the business?
Well, that's I guess question everyone needs to explore for themselves, right? Well, then maybe a different question is where do you want to where do you want to be in the next 6 to 12 months with your platform or with marketing position?
Yes. So we have a new phase of our platform that's under development, and I finally get to use the buzzword agentic workflow or agentic AI. You see it everywhere.
Yes.
And we're finally helping to deploy that. So I'm really curious to see how this helps save time and money for real estate developers and asset managers, how it can be rolled out, because they see the immediate return on investment with a tool like that, or this that we're implementing. That meaning agentic workflows, and then this meaning within our platform. And so that should entice a lot of people to log on, set things up, hopefully deploy this across their portfolio. And then the more long-term developments is that they're developing an asset records like a brain for their properties, all this knowledge, this archive, accumulative information that can be reused over time, handed to the next buyer or future stakeholders. So that's what we want. But to get it started, you need to show immediate ROI. And so I think AI is going to be very helpful for that. It's also becoming easier to deploy AI because nothing knows AI better than the AI itself, which is really, really interesting. And that's why stuff like Claude Code is so popular because what's better at coding than something that is made up of code? So it's really good at that
Yeah.
job. So software development is moving really quickly, and I'm eager to see what new features or functions we can roll out. And then, of course, the marketing portion. You can build it, but that doesn't mean that they come. We need to package this in a way that it resonates with people continuously, find a good price point, figure out what our competitors are doing, yada, yada, and then just position ourselves really well in the market.
Right, right. Well, I think that's interesting you say it because I just listened to Dan Martell yesterday, and he was talking about how easy it is. So the first time in the history has any kind of tool that we've ever used been able to teach you how to use it.
Right.
You had to build something, someone had to teach you how to build it, right? If you wanted to specialize in something, you had to go to a school to learn how to do that. But with AI, you can just ask AI, how do I use you? And then he
Hmm.
literally built in cloud a 90-day training video on how to use the cloud AI. It's very cool. Very, very interesting stuff. So if you could solve one major bottleneck in real estate today, whether it's data fragmentation, trust, or workflows, what would it be and why?
Well, I think you nailed it. We noticed there's a common denominator in every slow deal, every broken workflow, every deal that falls through, or every audit or every investigation. And it usually comes back to data and information. Whether it's because stuff was stale or fragmented, it was incomplete, it was modified, it was incorrect, whatever that is. That is the foundation for all things. And you can actually view this as layers. You start with a data layer, and on top of that, like a cake, you're going to have a trust layer, and then an intelligence layer, and then maybe a market layer. And the market is going to have your brokers, your lenders, your investors. The intelligence is going to be your analysts and decision makers, your executives, your AI tools. The trust is usually like brands or credentials. It is also authenticity or relationships. It could be blockchain and digital fingerprints. And then the data, that's your systems, it's your documents, it's your files, it's what you know about a building, it's what's been recorded, it's geometry, it's physics, it's all that good stuff that we need to understand about the world around us. It's also engineering, it's architecture. Like, so you have to start there. And I think without that, things get out of control really quickly. If you have big markets, big portfolios, big properties, but you don't have a really strong foundation, no different than the literal foundation of a property. If you don't do that portion correctly, everything built on top of that is at risk. And I think it's the same thing here. And there's many different ways to approach this. Does it mean holding your data in one place? Maybe. Does it mean having people who understand how to record the work being done and document that and upload it? Maybe. Does it mean using the best-in-class software? Potentially. There's different ways to approach it, but I think no matter what, if you have a strategy in place, that's the right place to start because it sets the standard for everything else. If you have really good data, if you know what you know, and you also know what you don't know and need to figure out, then everything else can be built on top of that. Trust can be built on top of data, on top of transparency. And then if you want AI tools, everyone's talking about AI. And this is why I was so hesitant about agentic workflows. Because if you don't have context or information, then your tools are nearly useless. Your AI tools don't know anything or they don't know
Right.
the information around them. You can throw in one document and it'll try to make an assessment based off of what it's generally been trained on. But that might be completely incorrect. And are you really going to make a massive property or portfolio or legal or capital decision based off of what Claude spit out or ChatGPT, or Gemini? Like these are prone to hallucination. They're not going to tell you if they don't know. They're just going to give you something and you're going to say, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." And then make a decision off of that. So we need data. That's the common denominator. That's what we can all look at, we can all agree on. And again, there's going to be a lot of value in that if you do it correctly. Going back to the oil analogy, if you drill for it, if you process it and you put to use, I think those people are going to be the new industrialists of the 21st century. They're going to be so far ahead, it's going to be crazy.
That's a whole lot of information. That's very interesting to digest. So, we've been speaking to Matthew Schneider from his real estate data platform. Matthew, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate you sharing your insight, what you're seeing in the market, and how you're building your business.
Thank you for having me. And again, go Google structured versus unstructured data because truly, I think I explained it in the worst way possible. But Joe, it's been a pleasure having this conversation, and I hope everyone is very successful in their careers, whether that's marketing, AI, real estate, whatever. Data is the best resource you could possibly be capturing right now.
Sounds great. Thank you.